All right, peace and blessings, everybody. I've got a letter here that's like a small booklet. It's from Gary Michael Northington. He spent over 30 years in prison for conspiracy to murder. Officer Jack McLam advocated for his freedom when he was alive. And if you want to download the book, you can go to Gary's page on yearofjubilee.com, Jubilee spelled with one E, just like it is in the King James Bible. If you want to hang around with me, I'm going to read it into this recorder. Satanic Deception, a de facto government. By Gary Michael, copyrighted 1999, revised April 2001. This appears to be 30 pages long, and I do have a letter here that says Gary cannot find the 77-page version. So this is what we have, and we'll go with this until he finds the 77-page version. Free Christian churches authorized to copy or use material herein. Free means non-26 USC Section 501c3. Table of Contents. Chapter name Preface. Satanic Deception, your introduction. My background, my introduction to the society. Miscellaneous perceptions and occurrences. The auction, renting a boy. Coercion, police harassment, etc. Breakaway to Tulsa. Conclusion. Satanic Deception, a de facto government. Roe versus Wade, Satanic Worship. Department of Defense. All right. Preface. This is not a book for children. It is a quick look at one small part of the many secret societies of the world that are, for the most part, instituted and controlled in the pyramid of manipulation by an ancient secret society which has the goal of one world government at the expense of you and your children. I wrote this quickly from a few notes and mostly from memory of 25 years ago. It is a mostly factual account of personal experiences from June 1975 to March of 1977. Some experiences from September 1976 to March 1977, entitled herein as Breakaway to Tulsa, are tentative dates until I am able to secure reference documents to exact dates. At the second auction, I attempted to use, but could not use, a tape recorder and camera because security was much tighter than the first auction, which had mostly caught me by surprise. If you ignore that these Satanists, pedophiles, and murderers exist as organized entities intending to control government, you are in denial and contributing to increased likelihood of abuse and premature death to you and your children by the totalitarian state. Holy Bible, John 8:42-47. The Bolshevik Revolution, circa 1917. Be proactive. Holy Bible, Luke 22:36, Ephesians 6:12, 1 Peter 5:8, Deuteronomy 30:19. Satanic Deception, your introduction. My belief, based on personal knowledge and food for thought, if you are not dumbed down and hypnotized by beer and Monday Night Football, the controlled media, etc. In March of 1999, when President Bill Clinton's impeachment hearing was held, a number of United States congressmen were blackmailed into voting not to impeach President Clinton based on the congressman's past involvement with illicit sex, drugs, and similar activities. As I now understand, this involvement was the result of predatory actions of a number of subversive organizations, of which I will elucidate my personal experiences and knowledge with one offshoot organization of the Illuminous Grand Council. The particular one with which I had involvement in this context was the Anthroposophic Society started by Rudolf Steiner of Dornach, Switzerland, known hereafter as the Society. There was also some CIA involvement related to a government mind control project now known by its declassified name as MK-Ultra. Ted Gunderson, FBI Bureau Chief, retired circa July 2000, and by my personal knowledge. I believe this is what happened. In April 1999, Newt Gingrich resigned as Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and speculation as to the reasons for this sudden event. In September 1999, it was revealed Gingrich resigned because of past illicit conduct. In September 1999, it was revealed Gingrich resigned because of past illicit conduct and extramarital affair that was not exposed at the time of Gingrich's resignation. Representative Robert Livingston of Texas was newly appointed to replace Gingrich as Speaker of the House. Immediately because of his opposition to President Clinton's representatives, Livingston was deliberately blown out of the water in public media as an example to other congressmen whose affairs were not exposed. Livingston was never contacted by anyone before the media exposure. He was just cold-bloodedly used as a sacrifice to intimidate the others who were not yet exposed as a control mechanism. My background. In May of '68, I began 4 years of military service in a classified field with a secret security clearance and applicability for the top secret if necessary. I worked on the Airborne Launch Control Centers, ALCC, for nuclear missiles, the reconnaissance aircraft that patrolled the Eastern Soviet Union, and later the nukes dedicated to Red China. I recall when we lost one of our recon birds in 1969 over the Bering Sea with no trace of the 11 crew members or the plane. I recall one time we flew 2 miles off the coast of Red China in 1971 and wondering why no Chinese defense fighters were ever came to meet us. During this time, I learned not to speak about my work, even to close members of my family. I was trained in security and kept that behavior even after honorable discharge from the U.S. Air Force in May of '72. During the time in the military, circa December 1969, I was traveling down a highway near Omaha, Nebraska during a blizzard conditions and came across a stalled Chrysler automobile. I stopped to help. A man and his family had been stranded when their car quit. I jumpered a ballast resistor on the firewall of the car with a Radio Shack clip lead, and they went on their way. The man was grateful because he believed I had saved him and his family from a reasonable likelihood of death, and introduced himself. He was a member of a secret society and eventually taught me about their doctrines to get me into the organization. This began a learning process of such secrets. After discharge from the Air Force in July 1972, I began working part-time from a local Omaha business to keep from starving because jobs were scarce. While working for this business, I met a lot of people in the drug culture. The group will be called the Blue Riders. This concerns later activity where the society thought I would be a useful connection and eventually attempted to ensnare me in their web. From October 1972 to July of '76, I worked for an international company that had numerous government contracts in high security areas known hereafter as the company, not the CIA. This was in the same area, contracted to the same organization I had been connected to in the military. Everyone with whom I worked carried a bond and security clearance. It was during this period that I observed a Soviet Union general enter the underground command post of the Strategic Air Command, 55th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing, at Offutt Air Force Base, Omaha, Nebraska. Offutt Air Force Base also had an MK-Ultra mind control treatment center as part of the 1960s government mind control project. I eventually met some of these monarch mind slaves and remember their code names, usually being Indian types like Cherokee, Apache, Comanche, etc. I didn't know what the project was about until the 1990s when it was declassified and given the name MK-Ultra. The company and its employees also had contact with political officials, bankers, and influential persons in unrelated security applications. In 1975, my wife and I became friends with an employee at the company, Jay Sin, not real name. Sin introduced me to a number of his friends and associates in the society. I was also an electronics expert, ran my own business in electronics, and eventually became well known to these people. Some society members were impressed with my technical skills and ability to keep quiet, not talk about the business of others, so they solicited my work often. Society members referred to my wife as your kid because she was petite and looked about 10 years younger than her age. Our appearance fit their modus operandi as I see it now. My introduction to the society. Jay Sin was divorced from his wife at some time in early 1975. He once said she divorced him because she claimed he was a pedophile. I asked Jay, "What's a pedophile?" He answered, "Like a homosexual." I asked, "Are you a homosexual?" He answered, "No." I never knew the definition of a pedophile until 1999, and wasn't sure what a homosexual was in 1975. Jay worked with me at the company's Omaha Central office, where I had transferred after an injury from an automobile accident in April of '75. I often worked with him, and we became friends. He learned I had an electronic business as a hobby or second job, knew many people with whom I did business, and eventually had me do work and repairs for him in that field. This led to my wife and I visiting him and his roommate on a regular basis at his apartment. Therefore, I eventually became acquainted with many of Jay's friends and associates, and we would sometimes hang out at the granary in Council Bluffs, Iowa, for breakfast after getting off work on the third shift. At sometime around January '76, Jay began joking about renting a kid at an auction of the society. At this point, I also became aware that some of Jay's friends with whom I became acquainted and did electrical work for were also members of the society. Not by direct announcement of the fact, but by certain language that seemed common and peculiar to these people as their own slang. Around early 1976, I had become familiar with a number of the society members who knew that I knew dealers in marijuana. In Nebraska, carrying an ounce of marijuana was not a crime. These members asked me to get the drug for them on a number of occasions, and trust in me grew as time went on. Did they consider me a friend or a youthful idiot? Jay began explaining more about renting a boy and the society as 1976 continued on. He talked about the auctions held by the society where children were rented and leased. The explanation for this activity was that the children were put into homes of non-family members so they could get out into the regular world. They would not be protected by the family, allegedly for the purpose of building up the confidence of the child in himself or herself. I heard mostly mention of boys and very little about girls from Jay. I observed that Jay was getting excited over the upcoming auction that was to take place on or about March 21st, 1976. In February '76, Jay said that he wanted to get the boy rented soon before the school year was ended, so he had to get approved to become a member of the society before the March auction. The method of approval into the society first involved a background check into ancestry to ensure that a person was Aryan. Jay was Lebanese from his father's side of the family, but his mother was Aryan. The society noted that Jay had hazel-colored eyes. He had enough Aryan blood to get into the society according to his family background check made in February of '76. The second investigation to be run to get into the society was a credit investigation. This was, according to Jay, to ensure that there would be no problems with police caused by bad checks written for donations at the society's auctions. They did not control all of the police, just a select few, so they had to ensure that a good cop wouldn't become involved in a police investigation of a bad check and learn of the auctions where children were rented, leased, and sold. This credit check was done by Larry King of the Franklin Savings and Loan of Omaha, Nebraska. This credit investigation was how I came to know of and meet Larry King, not the talk show host. Let me just interject here. The Franklin cover-up talks all about Larry King. Jay's credit check was started in late February '76. Around this time, talked of taking his rent-a-boy to Bohemian Grove. I said, "You mean Bohemian Cafe," which was a restaurant on South 10th Street in Omaha. Jay said, "No, I mean Bohemian Grove. It's a resort in California." That day, my wife and I bought breakfast for Jay at the Bohemian Cafe because we wanted to show my wife how good the baklava tasted. On March 10th, '76, Jay and I worked the third shift at the company. He got off work around 0800 hours. I got off at 0700 hours. At about 0600 hours, Jay asked me to go to breakfast after work to meet someone about his credit check for getting into the society. He mentioned the importance to him of this being done before the March auction. He wanted to rent his boy and have him while school was in vacation so he could take him to Bohemian Garden in July. I left to pick up some electrical devices after work and returned to the office. We met at the office and went to the King's Food Host restaurant at 30th and Farnham Streets in Omaha at some time after 0900 hours. Jay and I arrived at the restaurant in our own vehicles. We sat in a round table away from other customers, very few there. Larry King and Rusty E. Nelson entered the restaurant, recognized Jay, and sat at our table. Rusty was to my left and Larry to his left. Rusty was to my left and Larry to his left. Jay was at my right and an empty chair to his right. Red Black, not real name, who was already a society member, entered and sat in the empty chair just as introductions were being made. Jay introduced me to Larry King, and we shook hands. King had a limp, wimpy handshake, which I thought was because he was an intellectual nerd. I asked King, "Do you own this place?" King said, "I wish I did." Jay said, "No, it's Kane, like Citizen Kane, Grasshopper." Red said, "No, it's King." King was a black man who appeared to be of small frame, but slightly heavy. Jay then introduced me to Rusty Nelson. We shook hands. I asked Dusty, as in Springfield. Jay said Rusty, like a rusty nail. He was a brawny man of about 5'9". Someone mentioned that Rusty and I looked like twins because we were both of similar haircuts, face, build, and wore the same colored flannel shirts. This led the conversation to our weights. We discussed that despite Rusty being over 185 pounds and me being 155 pounds, we both had an appearance of being the same build. Light mention was made of Rusty being a cameraman. Then me being an electronics technician, I noticed King coming to a focal attention at this point. Meals and coffee were ordered, and conversation went to the credit investigation that Larry King had run for Jay at the Franklin Savings and Loan. King gave some papers to Jay and indicated that he had passed it without a problem. Jay said he was happy that he would now be able to get into the society and attend the next meeting and auction. Somehow conversation got around to my electronics skills again, if I recall correctly, because Jay mentioned that I had just come from an electronics supplier before the meeting and had a device in my pocket. I had showed Jay a bugging device before King and Nelson showed up. Upon mention of this, the eyes of Larry King and Rusty Nelson showed focused attention and much more interest than they had minutes before. King and Nelson were interested in my electronic skills to make bugging devices, allegedly for security purposes, that Jay had told them about. I showed them an FM wireless bug about the size of a quarter and 1/4 inch thick, not planned. Larry King was impressed with the fact that it was good for 1/4 mile. I eventually made a few of these for the society because I quit, because there seemed to be some sinister purpose of which I was unsure. March 10th, 76, King told me that he had politicians in his pocket. I didn't know what this meant at the time. He stated that he intended to do this up to Washington, D.C. and the White House. I was something like far out, and that I was happy to see minorities taking part in government. I thought it good for minorities to be able to participate in government, and when I asked if the mayor of Omaha, Gene Leahy, was one of the politicians in his pocket, he said no. Then went on to mention a few who were. I was later told the society intended to compromise integrity of politicians by getting them involved in illicit sex and drugs so the society could control them. Coincidentally, prior to and at this same time, I did subcontract work for covert government activities. Offutt Air Force Base at Omaha, Nebraska was also a treatment center for the government mind control project of the USAF, now known as MKUltra. I had met some subjects of the MKUltra project known as Monarch Mind Slaves, who usually had Indian-type code names. All right, I'm going to stop at the top of page 11, and we'll pick up here in a little bit. All right, picking up with page 11. I noticed that some of the same names and people seem to appear in the society, MKUltra and covert government activities. My subcontract work for covert activities was explained as tracking suspected rogue agents where the government could not go to their regular contractors because the rogues might discover they were being tracked. My involvement with the good guys tended to lead me to believe that everything was all right and we could sleep well tonight because the government is awake and protecting us. The everyday Christian church around which I was raised only taught a watered-down Christianity that did not include the evils of this world. I did not have the frame of mind to suspect the illicit activities that were really occurring, a form of denial that most people have because they just cannot comprehend the mindset of the evil one and his slaves. I now believe King and Nelson were the pawns of the society, and in the society's mentally and in the society's mentality were expendable. Larry King was president of the Franklin Savings and Loan of Omaha. Rusty Nelson was the society's photographer, who took photographs of the society's victims, the politicians caught in the act of illicit sex and drugs use. Nelson also had associates who made audio tapes and took pictures of the politicians, and to my understanding, King and Nelson ended up being named in a book about the activities related to this, the Franklin Cover-Up. I have never read the book. Let me just say that I did try to send a copy of the Franklin Cover-Up to Gary Michael Northington, and the prison would not allow him to receive it. Miscellaneous perceptions and occurrences. Up to this point, I believe my memories are 100% accurate. After 20 years of forgetting, I had to sit down and use extreme concentration in October of 1997, and later to pull out memories of what is written herein. I did not want to remember many things related to the society, because they were repulsive and went against what I believed to be right. There are a few perceptions and occurrences on which I cannot put an exact time frame in this section. On March 10, 1976, minutes after Larry King saying he had control over city and county officials, King went on to say he and his associates intended to take their agenda and political control all the way to Washington, D.C. and the White House. Although I don't recall his exact words, it was in the context of having political officials in his pocket, and gave me a picture of a black man being president. Somewhere between December 1975 and August of 1976, a society member and I discussed the drug scene and various illegal activities. He mentioned Harold Abdul, who had been found in a field near 110th and Q Streets in Omaha with his throat cut and tongue pulled outside through the cut. This member said news reports were inaccurate. He said Abdul had been helping another person with white slave trade, getting children to the east coast of the U.S. for transport and sale in the Middle East, and became too loose with his tongue. I don't know if this was a factual account or an inferred warning to keep quiet about what I knew, because I was cautioned to be careful on a friendly basis. Somewhere between February and June of 1976, I met a few members of the society named Roger, Raj, and Mike. Mike attempted to push me into a drug running between a certain marijuana supplier group and the society. I was friendly with the supplier because I had met these people through a man I worked for upon getting out of the military in 1972. This drug supplier group was later involved in the death of DEA agent Kiki Camarena in April 1985, and I happened to stumble into the investigation by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wasn't involved in the death. Mike gave me an identification card which he said would help me if stopped by friendly police. There was something to this because I got stopped for speeding at least 30 miles per hour over the limit in a small town in Kansas and one in Nebraska, and was released upon showing the ID card. I was amazed. Raj became friendly, stopped by my house a few times for tea and discussions, and got me into later meetings of the society. When I did investigative work in or around early 1977, I can't recall the exact dates, he apparently disappeared in 1977 after I got caught at a meeting that I got caught into with a fake society ID card, and they discovered I was not a member. The auction, renting a boy. In this time period, I owned an electronics business just outside Offutt Air Force Base, just south of Omaha. Had been doing contract and subcontract work for the government, covert activities for years, and met a number of participants, Monarch mine slaves, in the MK-Ultra treatment program at Offutt. The code name of MK-Ultra subjects were usually Indian-type names such as Apache, Cherokee, Comanche, Kiowa, etc. Government covert operators who contacted me worked for bear, and had animal names like fox, red fox, badger, etc. I also had a code name to verify myself to the operators. My business customers were mostly military personnel, government agents, local businessmen, friendlies of the society, and friends. The auctions of children run by the society were held at two places. The primary location was northeast of Lincoln, Nebraska, about 1/2 mile off the east coast of the Interstate 80. The other location for the auction was somewhere south and maybe a little east of Council Bluffs. I was never able to locate the Iowa farm where alternate auctions were held. The alternate site was used when the primary was not safe to use and for various get-togethers and autumn rituals. On or about March the 21st, 1976, Jay, Red, Roger, and I left Council Bluffs, Iowa to go to an auction. We met that morning at the granary in Council Bluffs. I was extremely tired because I had been working all night at the company and then had electrical work to do at my shop. I slept most of the way to the auction, so I don't recall how we got there or where it was located. I was told it was south of Omaha. When we arrived at the driveway to the farmhouse and the barn was blocked with sawhorses, it had been a foggy morning and rather dreary day, so I didn't get a good look at the buildings, but I did see a pale yellow farmhouse with white trim. I noticed tire tracks in the mud because the ground was soft. The auction had been canceled because a woman on the 9/11 dispatch board, who was a wife of one of the society members, had received a report and dispatch to investigate the auction for illegal activities. After the canceled auction, Jay mentioned to me a number of times that he hoped the auction would be held before June so he could rent his boy before school got out. Jay was preoccupied with taking his boy to Bohemian Gardens and meeting well-known politicians. At some time between the canceled auction and the next auction, I went to a society get-together at Bill Bailey's Banjo Bar, near Northwest Radial Highway in Omaha. It was in the upper-middle-class Benson area of Omaha. Larry King and Rusty Nelson were there. I was introduced to a number of society members I had never met before, and a few politicians. Bill Bailey's had a Dixieland air where everyone stood on the chairs and sang and clapped to live Dixieland band and drank a lot of beer. Bill Bailey's was a small public place with a limited capacity and low overhead, where any group of people could effectively take over the building for a night by jamming it to capacity before most of the usual crowd showed up. This was the topic before going to there. Society members became loose-tongued around me because they thought I was one of them at this event. One of them had been told about my electronics skills, apparently by Larry King, and we made arrangements for later business transactions related to the surveillance devices and some detective-type work. I did not know or realize at this time the sinister purposes of the society and its pawns. Eventually, some members told me some society secrets. Meeting them at Bill Bailey's and other places helped to create that familiarity. The Bill Bailey's get-together was a precursor to breaking down the inhibitions of the society's targeted politicians, and later that evening getting them involved in illicit sex and drugs. This was one of the many schemes I later realized. Therefore, while the society was loosening up their victims, they were also getting loose in security. Life is a two-way street, or so I'm told. At this time, I was one of the generally dumb public living that normal life of working, eating, sleeping, and having fun in ignorance of divisive schemes of the evil one intended to entrap the ignorant. At a later date prior to June 1st, 1976, the rescheduled auction was held. I went to the auction with society members named Raj and probably Mike. Mike was a policeman. I can't recall the second guy clearly, but he looked very much like Rusty Nelson and, strangely enough, was wearing the same type shirt that Rusty and I wore on March 10th, 1976 when we first met. I had difficulty telling Rusty and Mike apart because I was not very familiar with them. We traveled down Highway 73 and 75 through a small, unincorporated farm town that had a name similar to the Haslett. The only thing there was in this town was a farm home, a 4 to 5 grain silos, and a bar. We then turned toward the west. When we arrived at the farm for the auction, it appeared to be the same one I had been to months earlier. Raj said this farm was about 1/2 mile from Interstate 80. Jay later said it was 1/4 mile from I-80. We arrived earlier in the afternoon. It seemed to be a relaxed atmosphere because some people were drinking beer and smoking marijuana. We were told the smoking had to be in the house or parking area to prevent having a fire. There appeared to be guards who kept a low profile at the perimeter areas. One guard had what appeared to be a semi-automatic rifle M16 with scope and binoculars. As I walked around and met people, a girl named Dee came up to me. She said she was 15 years old and had been picked up by a society member as a runaway from home when she was 13 years old. She claimed to have had sexual relations with the member who picked her up and at least another, and had been sold at more than one auction. She wanted me to buy her because I looked like a nice guy. But I wasn't doing any such thing, only observing because I didn't really believe children were being auctioned, no matter how benevolent the explanation, to help them gain confidence in dealing with the world. 20 or 30 children were being auctioned off. I estimated them to be 7 to 13 years old. They were to be sold, leased, or rented in terms of months or year, and outright purchases according to the auctioneer. Some of these children leave the auction with the persons who had bought them. Jay rented a 10-year-old handicapped boy for 2 to 3 months, beginning on about June 1st, 1976. Jay brought the boy to his home near Omaha apparently that day because the boy left the barn area with him and they weren't seen anymore that day. On or about June 1st, 1976, when I stopped by Jay's home, the boy was sitting on the sofa. Around June 10th, 1976, I returned to Jay's home and the boy was gone. Jay said there were difficulties because of the boy's handicap when he slept with Jay and read between them in their bed. Jay mentioned feeding the boy peanut butter sandwiches. I attempted not to show a repulsion or anxiety reaction to what he said, just laughed and questioned what he said in disbelief. Back to the auction. Someone who appeared to be a pastor or priest was at the first part of this auction. He was described to be a Catholic priest nicknamed Black Bart, and his real name may have been Father Bartholomew. It was noisy at this point. He said he was said to be from Father Flanagan's Boys Town of Omaha. As evening set in, the mood of the auction changed. The first part seemed like people having a good time. The second part seemed to get a sinister atmosphere. Some adults later were dressed in red and black devil suits with horns and a tail. One man dressed in a red devil suit was described to me by Dee as a leader. The auctioneer was dressed in a gold-looking suit that resembled something from the Middle Ages or a conquistador suit with long tails in the back. On the stage there was a skit of a young boy on his hands and knees mimicking wrestling or two dogs copulating for a minute. I was distracted for an instant by someone speaking to me, then turned to see that the adult mimic cutting the boy's throat with a rubber knife and fake blood squirting from the boy's neck. I thought it was real for a few seconds, until it was pointed out that it was done with props. The apparent moral of the skit was that anyone who told the society's secrets would die by such a method. The adult doing the act was in a devil suit, and a boy appeared to be dressed as a goat. I left at about this time, after Jay had left and apparently was supposed to have left before this part of the auction. There were also some weird paintings that seemed demented to me. The same or very similar paintings were part of the next auction in late 76 or early 77. One painting resembled the skit of the boy in a goat suit getting his throat cut. It was a person who had been beheaded in somewhat of a reclining position, with his head laying next to him and blood spurting out of his neck into the bowl which appeared to be held to catch the blood. This is the end of these series of events. Even at typing the draft to this, I began recalling the repulsive feeling I had after realizing that these things were not right with these people. That things were not right with these people. It can be best described as, do not touch the unclean thing. Holy Bible. It also brings a tear to my eye when thinking of the harm done to these children by such people, mostly because the generally dumb public and even most Christians live in denial and just don't believe things like this happen in our civilized society. Coercion, police harassment, etc. Around this time, maybe June of 76, Jay, Raj, and another man kept inviting me to become a member of the society. They talked of various benevolent activities and some of the society rituals. The one that stood out most was the Indian blood brother ritual the society had adopted from American Indians. This was the ritual Jay did shortly after clearing his credit check on March 10th of 76. Some of their ritual practices was similar to those the friendly Mason taught me in and around 1970. The man rescued in a blizzard. It seems that most secret societies have similar rituals because, after all, most of them have the same founder, Lucifer, the common thread leader of the conspiracy. A number of things occurred so quickly that a date cannot be put on them. A present analysis, when put on paper, seems that most events were an orchestrated attack to push me into the society's control because I would be a valuable asset. It is easy to deny the orchestration in a person's mind where it can't be seen clearly. In June of 1976, I went to the Omaha police and reported the activities of the society. The Omaha police acted as if they did not want to believe what I told them at the station. Shortly after the report, 2 police officers in an unmarked van began tailing me and once attempted to set me up by planting illegal drugs on me during one bright June day. I first learned from John DeCamp in 2001 that the Omaha Chief of Police, Bob Watson, was controlled by the society and had an adolescent concubine. All right, I'm going to stop on the top of page 22. All right, picking up at the top of page 22. In July of 1976, a society member was attempting to sell me his girlfriend of 16 years old. She was a beautiful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl. I told him no, but did not give him a reason. I was a faithful husband. I wondered what such a beautiful, educated girl was doing with such an ignorant 50-year-old man. In and around July 1976, Mike attempted to get me involved in the drug running between society members and drug supplier I had met many years before, circa 1972. Mike knew I had done the traffic ticket type carrying of 1 ounce for Jay a few times. I told Mike I did not want to get involved in drug running. He set me up to pick up some marijuana once when I went to do a repair for another society member. I stopped by the police, showed the police the ID Mike had given me, and they let me go. I was not only amazed but relieved. My analysis was that he was just attempting to get my confidence to pull me in for bigger things. I was soon introduced to a number of people in government offices. They all seemed to know what I had been doing with society members and treated me like a king when visiting their homes. It was like being caught in a whirlwind with no protection. At this point, I went to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Omaha. The FBI gave me the same cold, unbelieving attitude that I had received from the Omaha police. They didn't care what was happening to those children controlled and abused by the society. It seemed very strange that the federal government did not care about crimes going on under their noses to one raised in fundamental Christianity who was recently a federal employee of the USAF. In August of 1976, I went to a friend who was retired Omaha police officer, John P. After hearing descriptions from me, John said he knew of the group and their activities, but never knew anyone who had been to the auctions and activities. He said not to say anything to anyone else, and he would take care of the report for me. He warned me to be careful because of the serious danger to me and my family, which I took lightly. In July 2000, Ted Gunderson, FBI Bureau Chief, retired, said that persons scheduled to testify against the society always ended up having a serious accident or dead before they made it to the trial. He said they are more dangerous than the mafia. There have been at least three attempts to murder me from an unknown source. It was nearly dark when I went to a second auction in September or October 1976, somewhere south of Council Bluffs. This seemed different than the spring equinox auction. Prior to this auction, there was a little room boarded off from the main part of the barn where a man was showing movies that appeared to be a boy of 12 years old engaging in oral sex and sodomy with an older man. This was shut down or gone when customers began showing up. The man also had pictures of what appeared to be himself and a minor child in sexually explicit poses. During the auction, a much larger number of men went around in the red and black devil suits, and like the first auction, a man in the red suit was the boss. Unlike the first auction, there were actually pictures auctioned off at the beginning of the proceedings. One of the pictures, which I described earlier, was of a person sitting in a chair with his head laying next to him and blood spurting out of his neck into a bowl, and the rest were equally bizarre. This was supposedly a liberal arts auction and again ended up in the sale of children after most of the art lovers had left. Breakaway to Tulsa. There appeared to be no way out of involvement with the Society people without radical changes in my life. I began dual residency in Omaha, Nebraska and Tulsa, Oklahoma sometime in or after September 76. This involved much traveling and was an excuse for not being around the Society and its influences. It ended most police harassment that began with my report to the Omaha police. In Tulsa, a security detective agency was informed of my skills, and asked me to work for twice the salary paid at the company. I couldn't turn this offer down and began working for the agency immediately. In late 76 or 77, when the 10-year-old nephew of a prominent customer disappeared, I volunteered to do scouting work for possible leads on the whereabouts of the boy, Charles. This took me back to Omaha into meetings of the Society where they discussed ritual abuse and mind control of minor children. Most of the meetings were just discussion of rituals and some practice of them. It is difficult to recall the mundane things. One meeting involved discussions of using 2 metal plates attached to a 120-volt AC power cord with the AC plug on one end and the other end put to the temples of the child strapped to a medical table. This was presented in a handmade drawing. I asked, "Don't you use a resistor to limit the current?" And the man answered, "What for?" They discussed how to severely beat a child without leaving external marks. They also discussed repeatedly submerging a child in a bathtub of ice-cold water until he almost drowned. These were means of breaking down a child mentally so he could be controlled by the Society members. At the final meeting I attended in Omaha, a chalice containing blood was passed around for each member to drink as part of the ritual. It was a beige-colored vessel with markings on it that appeared to be Celtic. When I used the excuse of having a cold to keep out of the ritual, they somehow discovered I was not one of them. I left the meeting as a member, went to the kitchen, and was returning with a semi-automatic firearm when Raj grabbed me and said we had to leave quickly. The gun looked like a military .45 but had a name like Ruger. This meeting was in a home near 42nd and Dodge Streets. I never found any leads on the missing nephew of the doctor, but found... I'm going to stop right there. I never found any leads on the missing nephew of the doctor, but found a few leads on what appeared to be missing children who were tracked through Salina, Kansas to Ocean Springs, California, somewhere north of San Francisco. I never connected these disappearances to Bohemian Grove then. However, as a result of Alex Jones getting videos of the Bohemian Grove rituals on July 15, 2000, that seems likely end of these children. See Infowars.com for Bohemian Grove video. On or about April the 5th, 2001, I learned Paul Banoffee told of going to Bohemian Grove with 3 other boys, of which one boy was killed, cooked, and eaten by Paul's captors and other boys. In 1977, I faked my death to convince the Society I was dead by using a convenient automobile accident, and earlier that year, the Society thought I was dead until late 1986 when a public official in Monroe County, Michigan, told them where I was. This public official was also a member of a certain secret society, those who control our courts' legal processes. In early 1987, I ran into 2 people in Ohio who knew of me in Omaha and later realized them to be Society affiliates. A few days later, someone attacked me and left me for dead. Prior to 1992, when Rusty Nelson was arrested in Oregon, the FBI was given a van 3/4 full of pictures, films, videos, and audio tapes of political officials engaged in acts of illicit sex and drugs. These officials were in scope and from local state governments to U.S. Congress, covering all major cities and influential areas. These documents made it into the Filegate files that Bill and Hillary Clinton were exposed in the media for illegally having in 1993. Although they illegally destroyed the FBI files, this evidence leaked out to the press in 1999. The evidence was published by Larry Flint in Hustler magazine to blow away Representative Robert Livingston of Texas during the presidential impeachment hearings and cause Livingston to resign as newly appointed Speaker of the House and State Representative. The Society is just the tip of the iceberg, a small piece of the puzzle. How many other non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are doing the same and controlling the persons who you thought were your representatives in the United States Congress? And if you do not have control, what is the mentality of the non-governmental organizations that control the future of you and your children? They are a culture of death. They care nothing for you or your children other than what pleasure you can provide to them. In their eyes, you are nothing more than a peasant, a peon, that pollutes the face of the earth and lives only at their pleasure. You are a useless eater. If you perform some function to their benefit, you are a useful idiot. Is this who you sell your sovereignty to for a meal ticket? Holy Bible, Genesis 25:29-31. Alden versus Maine, 527 U.S. 706. 119 S. Court 2240, 2281, 144 LED 636, 1999. The sovereign must be found in the man. Satanic deception, a de facto government. The United Nations, UN, depends on NGOs to do much of its work. These international entities do not have a basis in the American heritage and our Republican form of government, but are mostly socialist in philosophy. They believe in the individual must give up their rights for benefit of the collective, or so they say, but in real practice it is the peon must serve the elite. Recent legislation of the U.S. Congress cites incorporating many of these UN NGOs into our government and giving the UN sovereignty over our government. The UN Millennium Group, New World Order, announced their beginning on September 6, 2000 at the Rockefeller Center in New York. They asserted use of force to gain our compliance with them. The center two removable pages of this book are an insight into the mind of those who intend to control us based on knowledge gained from their documents and teachings. Photocopy these and pass them out. Be a teacher and not a sponge. Economic war began on March the 21st, 2001. Hold on just one second. So it's talking about the center two removable pages, but I don't see that in this book, so I don't know what he's talking about. I'll have to write him a letter and tell him that I don't see the two center removable pages. Roe versus Wade, satanic worship. The U.S. Supreme Court of Roe versus Wade, 410 U.S. 113, a bunch of numbers, justifies abortion on the philosophy of an ancient Greek sect, the Stoics, that life begins at birth. The court ignored the Christian belief that life begins at the moment of conception. The Stoics were followers of the Greek god Zeus, known as Jupiter, Olympus to the Romans, and the Baal to the Hebrews. Does this tell you who they are? Every abortion is a pagan sacrifice to Lucifer, ordained by the de facto government. Department of Defense. Proceeding on a government contractor's claim for the alleged breach of contract, the U.S. Court of Claims held that where contractor without knowledge of its management presented and received payment on fraudulent claims and after fraud became known, government agents with apparent knowledge of assistance, Secretary of Army conducted proceedings so as to justify conclusion that resumption of production would be authorized in reliance on which contractor restaffed and kept plant in operating condition. Supplemental agreement on understanding untouched by issue of fraud resulted, and government's attempted termination thereafter on basis of False Claims Act was wrongful and not justified by its prior reservation of right to cancel contract for fraud. But the contractor was entitled to recover for termination. Carrier Corporation versus United States, 328 F2D 328 COC 1964. Line workers switched defective 90mm T91 shells with inspected good shells to meet production schedule, allegedly without knowledge of the management. Fraud is a difficult thing to prove. It is impossible to look into the recesses of another's mind. Conclusions usually must be reached by a process of reasoning and the logic of analysis applied to facts and circumstances that are known or disclosed in the record. The lower animals act from knowledge and instinct. Human beings act from knowledge and intellect. From knowledge, reason, and belief. The dog knows and believes in his master, whom he has seen. Man believes in a creator whom he has not seen, save as revealed in the genius and works of the master builder, and in the perfection of natural law. This reasoning power is the primary difference between the brute and man. Carrier 328 F2D at 334. The above is a Masonic discourse by a Masonic judge presiding in a court case over a secret society-run corporation. The corporation employs and protects members of the society. Does this tell you how deep They are into the fabric of our society and government. You have been educated enough to start the learning process. Everything you do makes a difference. Don't live in denial. And that's the end of the book. I'm going to write him a letter about the 2 middle pages. Gary Michael Northington has been in prison for over 30 years on conspiracy to commit murder. It's the same charge they got Schaefer Cox with, and Officer Jack McLam advocated for his innocence. Thank you for your time.